With 9 days to go before the 2025 federal elections in Germany, the CDU is writing its election program. Chancellor candidate Friedrich Merz recently caused quite a stir in the Bundestag. Keyword: migration debate. Today we take a closer look. What is the CDU planning? The SPD, on the other hand, is campaigning with the slogan "More for you, better for Germany" and is running again with Olaf Scholz. The SPD wants to create a new upswing and also relieve the burden on employees and families. What will that look like? In today's special episode, we take a closer look at these two election programs. Good morning on this Friday, February 14th. I'm Tilman Rede, and after last week's look at the election programs of the Grüne and the AfD, today we'll take a look at the SPD and the CDU. We'll take a closer look at employment and the economy, health, pensions and social affairs, and migration. In order to take a closer look at the two election programs, I once again asked our editorial team to focus on the Bundestag elections. My colleague Rena Lehmann from Berlin took a closer look at the CDU platform.
The CDU on economy and employment.
The CDU has decided to initiate an economic turnaround, which it believes is urgently needed, and intends to take various measures to achieve this. Among other things, it considers energy prices to be completely excessive, and therefore wants to start by reducing the electricity tax and lowering the network fees in order to support intensive companies, which would reduce the price of electricity by several cents. It hopes to profit from this. In addition, it wants to repeal the heating law introduced by the traffic light government and, unlike other parties, it does not want to initiate the economic turnaround with subsidy incentives, but to enable lower taxes and levies for companies overall. In other words, the tax burden for companies is to be reduced to 25%. The CDU is of the opinion that Germany's corporate taxes are no longer competitive and that they are a disadvantage for the country as a business location because they are very high. In addition, the solidarity surcharge, which some companies still have to pay, is to be completely abolished. In addition, there is another relief for a specific sector that the union has included in its electoral program, namely the catering industry. As in the case of the coronavirus pandemic, the value-added tax is to be reduced to 7% in order to provide an incentive. Overall, the CDU-CSU has set itself the goal of reducing bureaucracy across the board. Many parties have also pledged to do this, and the traffic light government had already started. Now the CDU-CSU wants to go one step further and, among other things, repeal the German Supply Chain Act. There is a European Supply Chain Act that will come into force, and that should be sufficient.
The CDU on pensions and social issues.
When it comes to pensions and social issues, the CDU does not want to change the retirement age. This may be an important point to start with. It also does not want to cut pensions, including the pension at 63, but it does want to make working longer more attractive, so to speak, and pensioners should therefore be able to earn 2,000 euros tax-free if they want to work longer. The government also wants to create a pension fund to provide a broader basis for pensions and old age provision. For 6 to 18-year-olds, 10 euros a month would be financed by the state in this system, so to speak, which could then be saved for old age, and that would actually be something new that would then be introduced, and which would of course benefit the broader financing of pensions, which are often not enough to live on in the long term. Another important issue for the CDU-CSU is the citizens' income, which has been a problem for them for a long time and which they thought was wrong when it was introduced with the traffic lights. Even in its name, because it says that the citizen's income is an unconditional basic income, which it is not supposed to be, but rather money, that people who are in a difficult personal situation receive, and that is paid temporarily, but should not become permanent. That is why the CDU-CSU sees great potential in getting many thousands of people who are on welfare back into work, and, as they say, the system should be turned upside down. In other words, priority should be given to getting people back to work, which the CDU-CSU hopes will lead to many people going back to work and paying social security contributions, thus relieving the social security system as a whole.
The CDU on health and care.
The CDU-CSU does not plan any fundamental reforms in the area of health and healthcare, meaning that they essentially want to stick with the dual system, which consists of statutory health insurance and private health insurance. On the one hand, the CDU-CSU would like to increase competition between the health insurance funds so that they can work more efficiently, so to speak. and the word efficiency is often used, meaning the contributors' money should be used more efficiently in the system. This is a project that has been on the agenda for a long time, and the CDU-CSU has now set itself this goal once again. In addition, the digital patient file and the digitalization of the entire healthcare system are to be pushed forward decisively, which will hopefully also have a positive effect on the financial situation and save personnel. So yes, the CDU-CSU wants to make further progress in this area, and many things have already been initiated. As far as long-term care insurance is concerned, the government wants to place more emphasis on individual provision in the future. Since long-term care insurance is not a fully comprehensive insurance, and as it turns out, the money is usually not enough to cover the costs, the CDU-CSU wants to create incentives for people to make their own provisions at an earlier stage in order to be able to finance the costs of care in old age. Perhaps also important is the fact that the CDU-CSU rejects active euthanasia and, of course, also wants to make sure that there are enough skilled workers in the care sector where there is a permanent shortage of staff to be able to care for the growing number of people in need of care in Germany, and that there are incentives and attractive offers to make the working environment more attractive for people working in this field. However, this remains somewhat vague in the program.
The CDU on migration.
In recent weeks, migration has become an important, if not the main issue of the election campaign. After the attack in Aschaffenburg, Friedrich Merz promised a turnaround in migration, similar to the economic turnaround, and basically linked it to his chancellorship, saying that he would actually take action from the first day of his chancellorship and impose a de facto entry ban on refugees. This would basically mean that it would be possible to turn people away at the borders, which has not been done so far. This is currently legally controversial, but Mr. Merz has already announced whether this is possible. The union also wants to end family reunification for refugees with subsidiary protection, i.e., refugees in Germany who are protected for a limited period of time. It also wants to introduce the payment card everywhere, which means that asylum seekers will not receive any or only a very small amount of cash, but will be able to use the payment card to buy directly what they need to live. Because the union considers the benefits to be a pull factor, that is, so attractive that many people make their way to Germany. And they say that this attractiveness could be curbed or reduced somewhat with the payment card. And it has decided to consistently deport criminals and dangerous people to Afghanistan and Syria, something that has always proved difficult in the past. The union does not want to completely shirk its responsibility to take in refugees. It would like to continue to accept refugees in Germany in the future and, so to speak, live up to its humanitarian claim. However, this should be done within the framework of quotas to be agreed upon. And the number of these quotas, how many people can come, remains open. It has not committed itself to that. In addition, and this is perhaps also important with regard to migration, she wants to partially reverse the new citizenship law introduced by the traffic lights. Under certain conditions, naturalization is now possible after 3 years. The union thinks this is too early and wants to revoke it. It also does not want to allow dual citizenship. So there should be a decision in favor of German citizenship. Let's take a look at the SPD. My colleague Tobias Schmidt has looked at the SPD's election program.
The SPD on the economy and employment.
The SPD wants to strengthen the economy, wants to make sure that the economy grows again. And the most important points are, first of all, that they want to lower energy prices. This means, for example, that the state should take over the expansion of the networks and wants to reduce taxes on renewable energies. And that means that electricity would become cheaper for industry, but also for private customers who drive electric cars or operate a heat pump. And that would help the economy enormously. Second point, the SPD wants to make sure that companies start investing again, meaning building new factories or trying out new technologies. And that's why they want to reimburse 10% of the investments that companies make. How will this be financed? The SPD says, well, we simply have to be allowed to take on more debt as a state. In other words, they want to loosen the debt brake. And secondly, they want to make some changes in the tax system. In other words, very rich people with very high incomes should pay a little bit more. But also private companies should pay a little bit higher taxes. And they hope that this will simply bring in more money. On the topic of employment, The SPD wants to raise the minimum wage so that by 2026, everyone who is employed and works for us will receive at least 15 euros. That's a bit difficult for some companies right now, but it also promises to give the economy a real boost. If people earn more, they will spend more. The SPD also wants to strengthen workers' rights. It wants to ensure that more people join works, councils, and trade unions. This is the classic SPD constituency that is being played to, and that is one of the key points of the SPD.
The SPD on pensions and social issues.
The Chancellor had actually planned a pension campaign in which he promised that the pension level in Germany would not fall below 48% of wages. This means that everyone who works will still receive at least 48% of their pension at the end of their working life. The issue has been completely pushed into the background because we are now only talking about migration and the economy. But it was actually quite clever of him to do it this way in the first place, because Merz originally wanted to do it differently and increase the pension period and not offer a pension guarantee. Then he got hit over the head so hard that he had to back down. And so the SPD is more likely to be seen as having made this pension promise when it comes to pensions. It wants to maintain that you can retire without deductions after 45 years of contributions. And it does not want people to have to work beyond the age of 67. But it wants to make retirement after 67, meaning working after the age of 67, more attractive so that there are incentives to continue working. What the SPD says about the citizens' income. After all, the SPD invented the citizens' income. After the Hartz reforms, it renamed social welfare into citizens' income and wants to stick to it. It wants to put pressure on people who don't have a job and therefore receive a citizen's income to apply for a job, to look for a job, or to accept the suggestions of the employment office. But it wants to increase this pressure only very moderately, and not, for example, introduce higher sanctions or faster imposition of sanctions. The goal of the SPD is to train people who have lost their jobs so that they can find a good job and stay in it, instead of taking a job out of necessity and then dropping out after 3 months, or being fired because it doesn't match their qualifications. That is roughly the SPD's concept of a citizen's income.
The SPD on health and care.
Keyword: hospital reform. In health policy, the SPD wants to ensure that people with private health insurance and those with statutory health insurance are treated equally, i.e., that they get an appointment with a doctor just as quickly and are entitled to all the services that are available to people with statutory health insurance. The SPD also wants civil servants and the self-employed to be able to pay into the public health insurance system. The private insurers earn a little more money, and they should give a little more of these profits to the statutory insurers, so that the statutory insurers get more money to finance their services. The SPD wants people with higher incomes to pay more than they do now. The healthcare system is already somewhat out of balance, so the SPD wants the government, i.e. the taxpayer, to increase its subsidies to the health insurance funds, so that contributors do not have to pay ever higher contributions. What the SPD does not want is to cut benefits. In other words, they want to leave things as they are for people who may not be so seriously ill, or who may want to use a certain service from a doctor, where you can certainly ask whether it is necessary or not. That is one of the big differences with the CDU-CSU. What is also important in the healthcare sector is that Karl Lauterbach, the current SPD Minister of Health, has pushed through a hospital reform that will lead to the closure of many smaller hospitals. However, this is a very sensible reform because it means that the remaining hospitals will be solidly financed and the quality of healthcare services will actually improve. The SPD implemented this reform in the last legislative period, and it is possible that the CDU-CSU would like to roll it back a bit. Of course, the SPD wants to prevent that at all costs. My last point is that they want to strengthen care for the mentally ill. This means that people with depression and other mental illnesses will be able to find treatment more quickly. These are the SPD's main points on health.
The SPD on migration.
Above all, the SPD wants a European solution. After years of negotiations, it was agreed a year ago that the asylum system in Europe should be restructured. In the future, people who apply for asylum should do so only at the external borders, meaning no longer in Germany or Austria or similar countries, but directly at the external borders of Poland, Italy, Greece, Spain, and France. people should be stopped at the external borders. An asylum procedure would then take place outside the EU or directly at the EU border. And only those whose asylum applications are accepted would then be allowed into the EU and distributed. This has been discussed for a long time, and the SPD has always maintained in this whole migration debate that we have agreed on this and that we have to stick to it. This is where the SPD differs fundamentally from Friedrich Merz. Friedrich Merz says that we have to stop irregular migration. That means that the people who come to us come from Austria or Italy. In other words, they come from safe countries where they will not be persecuted. And Friedrich Merz says, we don't let them in, we send them back. And this is a violation of EU law. The European Court of Justice has ruled several times that this is not allowed. Friedrich Merz wants to ignore that. The SPD says we can't do that. So now I have a better overview of the election programs of the CDU, SPD, Grünen and AfD, and already have an idea where to put my cross. A small addendum to last week's piece. My colleague Tim Prahle asked me for a correction to the presentation of the AfD's election program. He said that remigration is not mentioned there. This is not true. The AfD uses the term several times. The Bundestag elections are on February 23rd. As always, we will keep you up to date on the latest developments in the election campaign on shz.de and nos.de. We'll hear from you again on Monday. Until then, have a nice weekend.